The Brutal History of the Mongol Warriors. Sometime in the year 1162, in the grasslands near the Onon River on what is now the border between Mongolia and Siberia, a boy was born to a minor Mongol chieftain named Yesugei. According to the oldest Mongol chronicle ever written, The Secret History of the Mongols, the child came into the world clutching a blood clot in his right fist. His father named him Temujin, after a rival leader he had just defeated in battle, and took it as a sign that his son would be a warrior. 9 years later, Yesugei was dead, poisoned by Tatar enemies while riding home alone through their territory after arranging a marriage for the boy. Temujin's entire tribe immediately abandoned the widow and her children, refusing to follow an orphan 9-year-old with no power, no cattle, and no claim to leadership. The family survived the Mongolian winters eating roots, fish, and whatever small animals they could catch. What followed that abandonment shaped the man who would create the largest contiguous land empire in human history. Temujin killed his older half-brother Better in a dispute over food and leadership of the household. He was enslaved by the rival Taichud clan and escaped. He married a woman named Borte, who was subsequently kidnapped by the Merkit people, and he spent years building alliances powerful enough to rescue her. Their first child was born after the rescue, and its parentage was uncertain. Temujin raised the boy as his own and never spoke publicly about it. Here are the questions that define what happens next. How does an abandoned child become the master of 1 million people? How does a boy who grew up eating mice build an army that no civilization on Earth could stop? And what does it mean for human history that the answer to both questions turned out to be exactly the same? One man unites the warring tribes of the steppe. In 1177, Temujin was approximately 15 years old and living on the Mongolian steppe with his mother, his brothers, and whatever followers his growing reputation as a fighter and a leader had attracted. The steppe was a landscape of near-constant raiding and counter-raiding among dozens of clans who fought each other for livestock, women, and position. Alliances lasted as long as they were convenient and dissolved the moment a stronger option appeared. Loyalty was purchased with success, and success had to be demonstrated continuously or it disappeared. Temujin's approach to this environment was methodical and unprecedented. He formed a blood brotherhood with a powerful leader named Jamuka, allied himself with Ong Khan of the Karaite tribe, and began systematically destroying rival clans. When clans submitted to him, he integrated their warriors into his force, regardless of ethnic origin, organized them into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, and promoted leadership based entirely on demonstrated ability rather than birth. This was not how the steppe had ever operated. He also abolished the traditional practice of allowing winning warriors to loot immediately after battle, requiring all looting to wait until a complete victory had been won, and all spoils to be divided according to contribution. Widows and orphans of fallen warriors received equal shares. By 1205, Temujin had defeated every significant rival on the Mongolian plateau, including his former blood brother Jamuka, who was executed, according to the secret history, by dismemberment after refusing to collaborate further. In the summer of 1206, Temujin summoned the leaders of every Mongol clan and tribe to a great assembly called a Kurultai at the source of the Onon River. There, he was formally proclaimed Genghis Khan, a title whose exact translation is debated, but which meant something close to universal ruler or lord of the ocean. He was approximately 44 years old. He governed roughly 1 million people. He had been building toward this moment for 30 years. He now had less than 20 years left to live, and he intended to use every one of them. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support, and let's continue. Horseback archers, who rewrote the rules of war. In 1211, when Genghis Khan's armies crossed the Gobi Desert and entered the territory of the Jin dynasty of northern China, the Jin commanders had some basis for confidence. Their empire had a population of approximately 50 million people. It maintained a professional army. It had the Great Wall. What it did not have was any reliable defense against the military system that Genghis Khan had spent 20 years perfecting, and which no army in the world had yet encountered in its fully developed form. Every Mongol soldier maintained 3 or 4 personal horses, which allowed the army to cover up to 100 miles in a single day without exhausting their animals. The composite bow that every Mongol warrior carried, built from layers of wood, horn, and sinew, had a pull weight of up to 166 pounds and could drive an armor-piercing arrow more than 300 meters. The best English longbowmen of the period could achieve roughly half that range. A skilled Mongol archer could fire 6 accurate shots per minute from a galloping horse, including shots aimed directly backward, a technique the Mongols used routinely in their most famous tactic, the feigned retreat. The feigned retreat was not what it appeared. A Mongol force would engage the enemy, then turn and flee in apparent panic. When the enemy cavalry pursued, confident that they were winning, the fleeing Mongols would suddenly separate into prearranged flanking forces that encircled the pursuing formation and annihilated it with concentrated arrow fire from 3 sides simultaneously. Armies that fought the Mongols once and survived reported that their opponents seemed to move by magic, appearing and disappearing with no warning. What finally gave the Mongols the capacity to take walled cities was the systematic incorporation of captured engineers, first Chinese specialists, then Persian and Central Asian experts, who built and operated siege catapults, trebuchets, and incendiary weapons of a sophistication that nomadic steppe warriors had never previously possessed. By 1215, the Mongol army was capable of defeating any opponent in open field or behind fortified walls. No army in the medieval world had that combination. Genghis Khan destroys the greatest empire of his day. In the year 1218, a trade caravan of approximately 450 merchants traveled from the Mongol Empire toward the Central Asian city of Otrar, carrying goods for what Genghis Khan had proposed as a partnership in commerce along the Silk Road. The governor of Otrar, a man named Inalchuk, who was the uncle of Shah Muhammad II of the Khwarezmian Empire, suspected the merchants were spies. He arrested them and had them executed. The Shah confiscated the goods. Genghis Khan sent a diplomatic mission to the Shah demanding explanation and reparations. The Shah had one of the ambassadors executed, shaved the beards of the other 2 as a deliberate humiliation, and sent them back. For Genghis Khan, murdering ambassadors was the most unforgivable act in existence. He spent a year preparing his response. In 1219, between 90,000 and 200,000 Mongol warriors crossed the Tian Shan mountain range into Khwarezmian territory, approaching from a direction the Shah had considered geographically impossible, after crossing the Kyzylkum Desert in winter using the local guides. The Shah scattered his forces among fortified cities rather than concentrating them for open battle. The Mongols isolated the cities one by one. Bukhara fell in February of 1220. Genghis Khan reportedly rode into the city on horseback and delivered a speech telling the inhabitants that he was the punishment of God. Samarkand, the imperial capital, and one of the greatest cities in the world fell in March. The Shah fled west and died destitute on an island in the Caspian Sea, chased to his death by the Mongol generals Subutai and Jebe. The cities of Merv, Nishapur, and Herat were destroyed. Contemporary chronicles recorded death tolls so extreme that modern historians believe the region, which had supported approximately 2 million people, was reduced to perhaps 200,000 inhabitants within 2 years. The governor of Otrar, who had started everything, Inalchuk, was executed by having molten silver poured into his eyes and ears. 3 armies bring Europe to the edge of collapse. In the summer of 1240, Mongol forces under Batu Khan and the general Subutai completed the conquest of Kievan Rus by sacking Kiev, the largest city in Eastern Europe, and burning it to the ground. The population was estimated at 50,000 before the attack. Almost no one survived. What came next was not a continuation of the Eastern campaign. It was a coordinated, multi-front invasion of Central Europe, planned by Subutai with the kind of strategic precision that European medieval commanders had not conceived as possible. On March 24th, 1241, Mongol forces burned the Polish capital of Krakow. On April 9th, at a place called Legnica in western Poland, a coalition army of Polish knights, Teutonic knights, Hospitallers, and Templars was annihilated. The head of Duke Henry II of Silesia, the coalition's commander, was cut off and carried on a spear to the walls of Legnica to destroy the defenders' resolve. 2 days later, on April 11th, on the banks of the Sajo River in Hungary, the main Mongol force under Subutai and Batu Khan destroyed the Hungarian royal army of King Bela IV in the Battle of Mohi, a force that contemporary sources estimated at anywhere between 60,000 and 100,000 men. Hungary lost approximately half its total population in the months that followed. By the winter of 1241 and 1242, Mongol advance forces had crossed the frozen Danube and were raiding Austria and Dalmatia along the Adriatic coast. Subutai's plan called for continuing the advance westward through the Italian peninsula and France to what the Mongols called the Great Sea, the Atlantic Ocean. There was no European army left that could have stopped him. In December of 1241, Great Khan Ogode died in Mongolia. Every Mongol prince of royal blood was required to return to the Mongol capital of Karakorum to participate in the election of the next Great Khan. Subutai withdrew. Europe had been saved not by any act of resistance, but by the death of a man drinking wine 9,000 miles away. Kublai Khan builds the largest dynasty in history. When Genghis Khan died in August of 1227, during a campaign against the Tangut kingdom of Xixia, his body was carried back to Mongolia for burial along a route that was kept secret by killing every person who witnessed the funeral procession. Centuries later, historians and archaeologists have never definitively located his grave. The deliberate concealment was consistent with the man himself, someone who had spent his life controlling information as precisely as he controlled armies. The empire he left behind did not collapse. His successors continued expanding it according to the organizational principles he had established. His grandson Kublai Khan was born in 1215 and came of age in an empire that already stretched from the Pacific coast of China to the plains of eastern Poland. In 1260, Kublai became the 5th Great Khan of the Mongol Empire. In 1271, he formally established the Yuan dynasty, becoming the first ruler in Chinese history to govern the entire country from outside it, the first foreign emperor of all of China. To accomplish this, Kublai completed a conquest of the southern Song dynasty that had been in progress since his grandfather's time. The final battle came at Yamen in the waters off what is now modern Hong Kong, on March 19, 1279. The surviving Song fleet, carrying the remaining imperial family and thousands of loyal officials, was destroyed by Mongol naval forces. The last Song emperor, a child, was drowned by a loyal courtier who jumped into the sea holding him rather than surrender. An empire that had governed southern China for 150 years ended in a single afternoon. Kublai Khan then moved to build the most sophisticated administrative system any Mongol ruler had attempted. A capital at what is now Beijing, paper money as the universal medium of exchange, an extensive census and taxation system, and the postal relay network called the Yam. It was Kublai who received Marco Polo and gave the Venetian merchant a gold passport that allowed him to travel anywhere in the empire without paying taxes or facing interference. The empire Kublai governed at its peak covered 23 million square kilometers. Mongol warriors burn the golden age of Islam. In January of 1258, the largest army the Mongol Empire had ever assembled in the Middle East arrived at the gates of Baghdad. Its commander was Hulagu Khan, another grandson of Genghis, who had been assigned by his brother, Great Khan Möngke, the specific task of subduing Mesopotamia and Syria. The force included approximately 100,000 to 150,000 Mongol warriors, 10,000 Christian mercenaries from Armenia, and 1,000 siege engineers recruited from China. Baghdad in 1258 was not merely a city. It was one of the 3 or 4 largest population centers in the medieval world, with approximately 1 million inhabitants. For 5 centuries, it had been the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate and the intellectual center of the Islamic world. The House of Wisdom, the greatest library and research institution of the Middle Ages, housing manuscripts on astronomy, mathematics, medicine, philosophy, and science accumulated over 5 centuries, was located there. Scholars from every nation and religion had been welcomed and paid to contribute to its collection. Hulagu Khan offered the Caliph al-Mustasim the standard Mongol choice: submit and survive, or resist and die. The Caliph refused, reportedly believing that the Islamic world would send armies to his relief and that the sacred character of the city would deter attack. Neither proved true. On February 13th, 1258, the Mongols entered Baghdad after a 12-day siege. What followed lasted approximately 1 week. Estimates of the dead vary from 200,000 to 800,000 people. The Tigris River, contemporary chroniclers recorded, ran alternately black with ink from the destroyed manuscripts and red with blood. The House of Wisdom was burned. The Caliph was taken prisoner, wrapped in a carpet, and trampled to death by horses. The Mongols would not shed royal blood directly onto the ground. The 500-year Abbasid Caliphate ended in an afternoon. Islam had no caliph for the first time in its history. Slave soldiers deliver the first Mongol defeat ever. In the years between 1258 and 1260, Hulagu Khan's forces swept through Mesopotamia, captured Aleppo, captured Damascus, and reached the coastal city of Gaza, placing an army on the doorstep of Egypt. The trajectory of what followed appeared inevitable. No military force in the Islamic world had successfully stopped the Mongols in open battle in 4 decades of continuous conquest. The question of whether the advance could be halted seemed settled by everything that had happened so far. 2 things changed in quick succession. In August of 1259, Great Khan Möngke died in China, triggering an immediate succession crisis that required Hulagu to return east with the bulk of his force. He left behind a garrison of approximately 2 tumens, roughly 20,000 men, under a Nestorian Christian general named Kitbuka. And in Egypt, A coup had replaced the weak Ayyubid dynasty with a new military government, whose soldiers were called Mamluks, warriors of Central Asian origin, purchased as slaves in childhood, trained from youth in steppe cavalry warfare, and intimately familiar with exactly the tactical system the Mongols used. The Mamluk Sultan Qutuz and his brilliant General Baybars recognized that the depleted Mongol force in Syria was vulnerable and that the window would not remain open. They marched north. The Crusader kingdom at Acre declared technical neutrality, but allowed the Mamluk army to pass through its territory unmolested, an act of tacit cooperation that signaled how clearly everyone in the region understood what the alternative was. On September 3rd, 1260, in the Jezreel Valley in Galilee at a place called Ain Jalut, the Spring of Goliath, the Mamluk army confronted the Mongol force under Kitbuka. Baybars executed a feigned retreat, the Mongols' own signature tactic, drawing Kitbuka's cavalry into a trap. The encirclement was complete. The Mongol army was annihilated. Kitbuka was captured and executed. It was the first time in 4 decades that a Mongol army had been decisively defeated in open field battle. The westward expansion stopped permanently. A road without bandits connects the entire world. What the Mongol conquest created, after killing an estimated 40 million people in the process of building the empire, was something the world had never had before. A single administrative authority governing an unbroken land corridor stretching from the Pacific coast of China to the plains of Eastern Europe. The Silk Road, which had operated for centuries as a series of fragmented segments controlled by competing kingdoms that taxed travelers at every border, now ran entirely through Mongol territory under a single set of laws. The system the Mongols implemented to hold this territory together was called the Yam. It was a network of relay stations positioned every 20 to 40 miles along all major routes of the empire, each staffed with horses, food, and personnel. A message originating in Karakoram in central Mongolia could reach the western edge of the empire in days rather than months. Official travelers and merchants carried a gold or silver tablet, called a paisa, that guaranteed safe passage, provisions, and accommodation at every station along the route. Marco Polo received such a tablet from Kublai Khan in 1271. His account of using it to travel from Venice to China and back, approximately 24,000 kilometers, describes an infrastructure of hospitality and security that European roads would not match for centuries. The commerce that flowed along these protected routes was unprecedented. Silk, porcelain, spices, paper, gunpowder, and the compass traveled west. Medical manuscripts, astronomical texts, and surgical techniques traveled east. For the first time in recorded history, there was direct contact and regular communication between European and Chinese civilization. Scholars at the Mongol court in Beijing corresponded with scholars in Persia and the Muslim world. The Italian Renaissance, which began in the century immediately following the height of Mongol power, drew heavily on the technologies and knowledge that the Pax Mongolica had channeled westward. One expression from the period captures the reality of the Pax Mongolica more precisely than any historical analysis. A maiden carrying a nugget of gold on her head could walk safely from one end of the empire to the other. The empire devours itself and reshapes everything. The end of the Mongol Empire came not from any external enemy, but from the internal logic of the system Genghis Khan had built. He had created the most effective conquering force in the history of organized warfare. He had not created a system capable of governing what it conquered for more than a few generations without the continuous pressure of expansion. When expansion stopped, the empire turned on itself. The four successor Khanates, the Yuan dynasty in China under Kublai Khan, the Golden Horde in Russia and Eastern Europe, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Ilkhanate in Persia, began fighting each other within a decade of the death of Mongol Khan in 1259. The Golden Horde went to war with the Ilkhanate over territory in the southern Caucasus. Kublai Khan fought a civil war with his brother Erik Bauke that lasted until 1264. Princes of the blood who had been trained to conquer proved largely incapable of administering tax systems, managing agriculture, or preventing the corruption that accumulated when military elites controlled civilian populations with no accountability. In China, the Yuan dynasty collapsed in 1368, when a peasant rebellion led to the founding of the Ming dynasty and the expulsion of the Mongols from the country. The Ilkhanate in Persia had already fragmented by 1353. The Golden Horde weakened gradually and was finally broken by Timur, Tamerlane, in the 1390s. But the most consequential thing the Mongol Empire unleashed was not any military campaign. The trade routes that the Pax Mongolica opened and protected gave rapid transit to a bacterium called Yersinia pestis, the Black Death. The Mongol garrison at Kaffa, in the Crimea, besieging a Genoese trading post in 1346 and 1347, catapulted the bodies of plague victims over the walls. The Genoese sailors who fled carried the infection to Sicily and then to the rest of Europe. Between 75 million and 200 million people died in the pandemic that followed. The descendants of Genghis Khan, estimated today at approximately 16 million living people, or roughly 1 in 200 men worldwide, inhabit a world whose shape was determined, in ways both violent and generative, by the boy who was abandoned on the Mongolian steppe in 1171.